The animal kingdom is made up of major groups, recognized by key traits. Fish have fins. Some land animals have 4 legs, others 6. And several different groups have wings. Biologists have long sought to discover how groups of animals and their key features evolve. And one of the greatest mysteries has been the origin of birds. Our world has more than 10,000 species of birds with feathered wings. Where did birds come from? And how did wings and feathers first arise? To find out, scientists have scoured the fossil record. And they have uncovered surprising twists in the evolution of birds from their flightless ancestors. In the past 30 years, we've found a treasure trove of new fossil discoveries. They've made the origin of birds one of the best documented transitions in the history of life. I'm fascinated by birds. And as a paleontologist, I've spent my career chasing their evolutionary origins in the fossil record. Above all else, what makes birds unique are their wings. They're made of feathers that are stiff yet flexible. And bird wings are even more remarkable than airplane wings because they can flap, which allows them to maneuver rapidly and ultimately defy gravity. The quest to understand the origin of birds and other animals began in earnest over 150 years ago. When Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species, he argued that every major group of animals evolved from a pre-existing one. He predicted that we would find fossils with features that linked one major group to another. In fact, he staked his theory of evolution on the existence of these intermediates. But no fossils were yet known that reveal these transitions. Then, just 2 years later, a marvelous creature was unearthed from a limestone quarry in Germany. The 150-million-year-old fossil named Archaeopteryx rocked the scientific world. This Archaeopteryx fossil is truly remarkable. It preserves in fine detail feathers along the wing, just like those we see in living birds, and feathers along the tail. But the bony features tell a very different story. If we look closely, we'll see teeth in the jaw, tiny claws preserved in the hand, and a long bony tail, lacking in living birds, but present in things we think of as traditionally reptilian. For Darwin, it must have been an incredible vindication. He predicted that we would find forms like these. Archaeopteryx pointed to a close link between birds and reptiles. But which group of reptiles? Flying pterosaurs have been discovered with light, hollow bones. But their wings are constructed very differently than the wings of Archaeopteryx and birds. Here is a tiny pterosaur, and if we take a closer look at its arm, we'll make out 3 small digits, and a 4th, which is really, really long. The membrane of a pterosaur wing attaches to this 4th digit and along its body and hind limb. In contrast, the wings of Archaeopteryx and birds have only 3 digits, and their feathers attach individually along their arm and hand bones. These differences tell us that pterosaurs and Archaeopteryx evolved flight independently. Archaeopteryx must have descended from different reptiles. Thomas Huxley, Darwin's champion, was astonished by Archaeopteryx's resemblance to a turkey-sized dinosaur called Compsognathus. Compsognathis's hand also had 3 digits. It had hollow bones and stood on 2 legs. Similarities like these led Huxley to propose that birds are related to the branch of reptiles called dinosaurs. But other scientists questioned this conclusion. Birds appeared so different from dinosaurs, and some characteristic features of birds, like wishbones, seemed to be missing in dinosaurs, but were present in other reptiles.
We found an articulated foot.
When paleontologist Jack Horner began his career, few thought that birds could have come from dinosaurs. So Jack, why was it so hard to believe that birds and dinosaurs were related?
Most of the dinosaurs that the public knew about were really big. Like, this is a shoulder blade of a sauropod, and sauropods were gigantic.
Scientists thought that dinosaurs were cold-blooded and slow-moving, like other reptiles.
People couldn't imagine dinosaurs being agile and hopping around. They look at these big giant things and they lumber. There's no way to relate them to birds.
Then, in 1963, John Ostrom discovered a fossil in the Badlands of Montana that challenged that view.
What John Ostrom first found was this claw. Obviously goes to a foot. It was not a claw for walking on. This dinosaur actually used that claw for slashing. Deinonychus
was small, with a delicate build. It ran upright on 2 legs. It had a long, stiff tail for balance. Not all dinosaurs were big and lumbering.
Ostrom hypothesized that the animal would scale its prey and start using its slashing claw and probably eating the animal while it was alive.
Ostrom's discovery set off a revolution. What if dinosaurs weren't slow, but warm-blooded and fast-moving, like birds? When Ostrom compared Deinonychus to Archaeopteryx, he saw that they both had lightly built, hollow bones. And they shared even more features, including long arms and similar hip and shoulder bones. Ostrom concluded that birds did descend from dinosaurs, as Huxley had argued. Not from lumbering sauropods, but from another lineage called Theropods that walked on 2 legs and included T-Rex and agile predators like Deinonychus. While some scientists did not accept this idea at first, supporting evidence continued to accumulate, including the discovery that theropods had a feature of birds not previously found: a wishbone.
People had sort of looked for them and really didn't know what it was going to look like. And then, all of a sudden, we started finding them. Here is the wishbone of Tyrannosaurus rex.
When scientists analyzed the skeletons of theropods in birds, they found too many similarities for any explanation but common ancestry. Jack's collection at the Museum of the Rockies offers an opportunity to compare their features.
an Albertosaur tibia. As you can see, it's hollow, just like a modern bird.
This is a T-Rex foot. What we see here are 3 forward-facing digits that bear the weight of the animal, and in the back, a much smaller digit. If we take a look at this chicken foot, we'll see the same pattern. We've got 3 forward-facing digits, and on the back, a much smaller one. All dinosaurs share an S-shaped neck. You can see it here and in living birds like this chicken. New kinds of evidence also emerged. In 1978, Jack made the surprising discovery of a vast dinosaur nesting ground.
We discovered that dinosaurs nested in colonies and cared for their young, brought food to their babies. We also had evidence that they came back probably over and over again for many years to the same site.
In a radical shift by the 1980s, a consensus was finally building that birds descended from theropod dinosaurs, from active predators that walked on 2 legs. But scientists were about to discover the most startling evidence of all. In the mid-1990s, farmers in northeast China began unearthing dinosaurs 120 million years old. And these fossils preserved astonishing detail. In 1996, I was a first-year graduate student at my first scientific meeting. They were passing around pictures of this dinosaur. This chicken-sized theropod, named Sinosauropteryx, did not have scales. It was covered in some primitive kind of feather. To see those photos of a tiny, fuzzy dinosaur, it just blew everybody's minds. This dinosaur was just the first of many fuzzy and feathered theropods to be uncovered. Another, called Caudipteryx, had feathers identical to living birds on its tail and hands, but lacked wings. With the discovery of these spectacular feathered finds, there was no longer any doubt that birds were related to theropods. But while feathered dinosaurs settled one question, they raised a new one. These animals could not fly. Why were they feathered? It was long assumed that feathers evolved for flight. But what we found was that clearly feathers predate flight and arose for some other purpose. So why did the first feathers evolve? That's hard to tell from just the fossil evidence. But living birds may offer answers. Feathers provide insulation, so the first feathers might have helped keep dinosaurs warm. Birds also use colorful feathers in communication, in courtship, and in territorial displays. Dinosaurs may have used feathers in the same way. Feathers likely played different roles at first, and then were modified for flight. The modification of an existing structure for a new use is called co-option. It is a common way that new structures and abilities evolve. Bird wings are modified forelimbs, once used for grabbing and feeding. Just as the walking limbs of land animals are modified fins. And the turtle shell is a modified rib cage. So the co-option of feathers for flight enabled Archaeopteryx and its relatives to take to the air. and other features also evolved. When we look at evolution after the origin of flight, we see a lot of characteristics of living birds gradually accruing, but not in a simple linear sequence. Like other dinosaurs, this crow-sized bird had large claws on its hand. But like living birds, it had a toothless beak and a short, bony tail. While this species had teeth, its hand bones were partially fused to form a stronger wing. And this bird had a large breastbone for well-developed flight muscles like living birds. But it also had teeth. We don't find forms that are somehow lockstep intermediate between Archaeopteryx and living birds. But we find a diversity of forms we could not have predicted. For tens of millions of years, an assortment of scaly dinosaurs, feathered dinosaurs, and many types of birds lived together. Then, 66 million years ago, almost all of these creatures died out. A 6-mile-wide asteroid slammed into the planet and triggered a global mass extinction. Only a small group of toothless birds survived. And they evolved into the 10,000 species of birds we see today. We once might have said that the dinosaurs all died out. But now we know that living birds are a lineage of theropod dinosaurs in the same way that we are a lineage of primates.
Have dinosaurs gone extinct? Absolutely not. We separate dinosaurs into two groups now. The non-avian dinosaurs, fortunately, have gone extinct. And the avian dinosaurs are still alive, making it a beautiful world.
Dinosaurs are still with us. We just call them birds.
His colleague Hans Larsen at McGill University is conducting one of these experiments. Larsen is searching for the genetic changes that turned dinosaurs' long tails into birds' short tails over 150 million years ago.
This is a Albertosaurus, a relative of the T-Rex, and this guy has a tail that begins right here at the hips and goes all the way back for about 35 vertebrae. When we get to the very first bird, Archaeopteryx, they have about 15 vertebrae in their tails. And by the time we get to modern birds, like the chicken, we only have 5 to 8 vertebrae in their tails. And with this kind of a transition, in a very, very sort of short period of time, I'll bet that the chicken and all modern birds have the ability to develop a long dinosaurian tail.
Larsen is a new breed of paleontologist at the forefront of a new field. He's helped discover 7 new species, including a giant carnivore in the Arctic. But he's equally at home in the genetics lab and eager to apply molecular techniques to the study of dinosaurs. He begins by studying the development of a normal chicken's tail more closely than anyone has before. He stains embryos at different stages of development. And as he peers at an embryo, just 1.5 days old, he is startled. Larsen expects to see 4 to 8 vertebrae, like the adult chicken.
But instead we're finding right off the bat, and very easy to find, up to 16 vertebrae fully formed inside the early developing chicken embryo. So we're seeing that we have these fairly elongate tails, these sort of reptile-looking tails on birds early in development. And then if we follow it through development, we see that it gets shorter and shorter and shorter until they hatch. And then we have only about 5 vertebrae left in the tail.
Larson has discovered that the chicken embryo has a tail almost as long as an Archaeopteryx, the transitional animal between dinosaurs and birds.
So for about 150 million years, this kind of a tail has never existed in birds, but they've always carried it deep inside their embryology.
Now Larson is trying to reverse evolution. Can he make an adult chicken grow a long dinosaur tail? He starts with a list of genes he suspects control the tail's growth. He'll see what happens if these genes are kept on longer than usual. Larson implants a bead at the end of the developing tail. It contains the same protein that a gene would manufacture if it stayed active after it normally shuts off. Several days later, he looks to see if the developing tail is longer than normal. One by one, he experiments with different genes. And after several months, he hits the jackpot.
Here's what we found. We found that we could extend the tail a little bit longer. So now we have 3 more vertebrae added into the tail. And moreover, I think even more exciting for me, is that the scaffolding that all the vertebrae are developing onto is enlarging as well.
Larson suspects that the genetic system for developing a dinosaur tail is intact in modern birds. It just turns off earlier.
This tells us what's actually responsible for going from a dinosaur shape to a bird shape. And now we can go straight to the heart of the question. We can go right to the genetics, right to the base pairs of the genome, and see what's changed in between these things.
Larson is turning back the genetic clock millions of years.
I see no reason why we could not develop experimentally a completely dinosaurian-looking tail in a modern bird. The system for developing that is in place.
Since a bird's DNA contains a dinosaur tail, does it also contain other dinosaur features? Occasionally, an ancient evolutionary feature pops up naturally as an atavism, a repressed ancestral trait. This recently discovered dolphin has vestigial legs. Modern dolphins no longer have them, but their ancestors did. The genes that trigger the formation of legs are now turned off, but the genetic circuit to make them is still there, and once in a blue moon, a mutation turns it back on. In 2005, Matt Harris and John Fallon at the University of Wisconsin discover a new atavism that links birds to dinosaurs. Late one night, Harris is studying the development of feathers in a strain of mutant chickens. As he peers in an embryo only 14 days old, he notices something strange.
Looking at the head, I came across the beak, and there these structures were that were not supposed to be there.
They look like teeth. He shows it to Fallon, his advisor, and together they try to make sense of it.
We were shocked.
When a chicken smiles at you, it's something.
But are they really teeth? They peel away the beak to examine the structures more closely and clearly see that they are saber-shaped, just like the teeth of alligators. They even section their structure and compare it with a section of an alligator tooth at the same stage of development.
What we see here is that in an embryonic alligator, you have little bumps, which is actually the formation of these embryonic teeth. In the mutant, you get expression in the same regions. The same developmental programs are being turned on. Teeth are developing in this mutant.
Their chicken is on its way to developing teeth similar to alligators, T. rex. and Archaeopteryx. But do all chickens still have this ancient dinosaur circuitry? Harris decides to see if he can create teeth in a normal chicken. He opens an egg and injects a virus into the spot in the embryo that is developing into the beak. The virus will insert itself into the chicken's DNA and carry with it a gene that initiates the development of teeth in other animals. Harris suspects that this gene is present, but simply turned off in the region of the embryo that forms the beak. But his experiment is a long shot.
Making a tooth is a very complex structure, and so the idea that turning on one gene might be able to do this in an animal that hasn't made teeth in over 70 million years was somewhat of a stretch, slight stretch, like a Hail Mary pass.
2 weeks later, he examines his embryo and discovers a link to birds' ancestral past.
So this is what we found. It's very exciting that this is actually the mouth of one of these experimental chickens, and well, you can see very clearly the fact that you grow paired structures here on the lower jaw that look like teeth.
It now appears that birds still have the evolutionary memory to make the beginning stages of teeth. A regulating gene that tells the beak to make teeth is no longer activated. And they have the same curved shape as the teeth of dinosaurs. Surprisingly, new experiments show that genetic engineering could give a bird scaly skin, just like a Triceratops or a T-Rex. Matt Harris and John Fallon believe they have stumbled upon the genes that turn dinosaur scales into feathers. The first clue came when they began working with an ancient Chinese breed of chicken called a silky bird. The silky has primitive fluffy feathers, closer to what scientists believe feathered dinosaurs sported. But Fallon and Harris are struck by how this naturally occurring mutant bird is different from other birds.
If you look at the normal bird, you can see the scales here, and if you look at the silky breed, what you see is there are feathers.
Clearly, birds have the genes to make both. And there is another similarity between scales and feathers.
But they are really made of the same protein, which is called keratin, the same as in our fingernail.
Harris and others have already discovered that two genes orchestrate the complex development of feathers. On a hunch, he decides to try tricking a chicken's leg into growing feathers by turning on one of the feather-making genes before scales form. He coats the leg of the embryo with the protein that the gene would manufacture. Then he waits. The blue stain reveals the action of the gene in the chicken leg as primitive feathers develop. Harris and Fallon have made rudimentary feathers emerge instead of scales.
So the first initial observation was just pure amazement. I went and got John, and he saw that and said, absolutely, there was no question.
The researchers are uncovering the precise genetic changes that took place as dinosaur scales evolved into feathers. Their experiments suggest that with modest tinkering, it may be possible to turn back the evolutionary clock and replace a bird's feathers with scaly skin like a dinosaur's.
I would think as we learn more that we'll be able to do that. The genetic knowledge is there in the bird, and if we have it correct that the ancestors of the birds were scaly, then we should be able to induce scales on a bird.
Another difference between dinosaurs and birds seems harder to reconcile. Dinosaurs have hands, while birds have wings. But Hans Larsson has found that they too are genetically similar.
Dinosaurs closely related to birds have 3 really elongate fingers in their hands. So 1, 2, and 3. And these fingers are very, very adapted for grasping and snatching prey. If we now compare this to modern birds, we see that they also have 3 fingers in their hand. We might not see this all the time, but here's 1, 2, 3 fingers. But they're highly modified for flight. We now know that we can trace the 3 fingers in the bird hand back to these 3 fingers in the dinosaur hand, both genetically and anatomically.
Larson has little doubt that with more research we'll be able to transform a bird's wing back into a dinosaur hand.